were some of you. Such were some of you. But you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and in the Spirit of our God. Notice a couple of things about this verse. First of all, he not only lists the sins of the Spirit, and I mentioned some of those, but notice he says revilers. Have you ever met a reviler? A reviler is someone who gives you abusive speech. Normally angry people. And people who always think the worst of every situation. They prejudge everything and they make it the very, very worst. And only when they are convinced otherwise do they give somebody the benefit of the doubt. He said, don't think that a person like that is going to inherit the kingdom of heaven. But don't be deceived, because it's easy to excuse it and to think that they will. And he goes on to say, yes, swindlers. There are those who are dishonest in business, always chiseling somebody, always trying to get the best deal, always trying to make promises and then thinking of ways that they get out of those promises. And he says that the covetous, in fact, in chapter 5, verse 11, you remember he says that if someone is covetous and claims to be a believer, don't even eat with him. Don't associate with him. I've seen discipline of the church for a lot of different things. I've never seen it for covetousness. But Paul says, let's put that sin on the list along with all the others that are more noticeable. But then he says, and such were some of you. That's your past behavior. But you are washed. Now, if we were writing this, we'd have said you are justified, sanctified, and washed. But Paul begins with their experience first and says you are washed. Are you all following me today? I want you to know today that the world has no answer to the problem of guilt. None whatever. You either do one of two things. I learned it in the university psychology class. You sublimate it. I don't know exactly how the prof told us to do it, but that's what he told us to do. You try to work it into your psyche. You try to ignore it so that it no longer really causes you any trouble. That's, I think, what sublimate means. My wife and I had an alarm clock, one of these that beep, on these digital gadgets. And it was beeping in our bedroom every hour. And we toyed with it and couldn't get it to stop beeping. So I said, I'll put it in my study. That was about 5 or 6 months ago. Now, every hour on the half hour, I still hear the beep. But you know what? It's not very loud anymore. And one of these days, that battery is going to give up the ghost and say, I'm finished. That's the way the world says handle your conscience. You feel guilty. Let it die like a battery so that you no longer hear its screams or its whistle. Learn to live with it. Become hard. Just do it. Actualize yourself. That's one way. The other way, of course, is to drown it with drugs and alcohol. You know what Christianity says? That there is a way to be washed. The nature of the cross that we take into the world actually does cleanse the conscience. I mean, imagine having committed these sins. And these are terrible things. And there are people who are listening to this message who have done some of these things, and maybe even worse things. And imagine being washed by God, cleansed. You can get up in the morning and you can look into the mirror and you can see yourself because inwardly you have been made clean. Now, where can you find that? In our political agendas here in America. You can't find anything like that. That's unbelievable. I mean, that you will be washed. Some of you, bless you, you live with fear that someday your past life is going to come up to haunt you, and you wonder who knows now and who might find out. Once you have been washed, you give all that to God, trusting Him that even if the lid is blown off your life, He'll walk with you through the experience, because He really does love you. And if He washes you, you are clean. You are washed, Paul says. You were sanctified. That is to say, you were set apart. Imagine people having committed these kinds of things, and they have a mark on them that says, set apart by God for God. Special handling. Jesus said in John 17, I sanctify myself that they also might be sanctified through the truth. Set apart by God. And then he says you are justified. You're declared as righteous as God, thanks to Christ. You gave him your sin, and he gives you your righteousness, and you make it into the doors of heaven, welcomed by Christ himself. Yes, my friend, welcomed by Christ himself. This is Pastor Lutzer. Isn't it wonderful that we have in the Scriptures the great exchange, as I mentioned at the end of the message, where we get the righteousness of Jesus Christ. He got our sin, and we get his righteousness. And as a result of that, we can stand in God's presence. And so I encourage you today, if you've never believed on Jesus, would you do that? And remember that assurance comes if you believe that Jesus did all that ever will be necessary to stand in God's presence. And you believe it for yourself, you will be saved.
Dr. Erwin Lutzer with Part 3 of The Cross, the Basis for Morality. Another message on why the cross can do what politics can't. Running to Win comes to you from the Moody Church in Chicago to help you understand God's roadmap for your race of life. In sorting out how to mix faith and politics, we all need clear teaching. This 8-part CD series can be yours as our thank you when you give a gift of any amount to support Running to Win. Just call 1-800-215-5001. That's 1-800-215-5001. Online, go to offerrtw.com. That's offerrtw, all one word, .com. Or write to Running to Win at Box 11174, Chicago, Illinois 60611. This is Dave McAllister. Tomorrow, some final thoughts about the cross and morality. Join us for Wednesday's Running to Win.